Now, three things we're telling you about the war because you already know by now, many hours old, the news about things like the submarines. We woke up to all of that this morning. But there is an interesting piece of information that came out during the day. This hasn't happened in the past 10 minutes. I won't pretend that's the case, which is that despite the fact that Iran, which as we know, has been using not just missiles but also drones to flood the zone, to try to overpower the one-for-one systems that are about knocking out missiles. And as we spoke about last night, as we've talked about all week actually, how the change of warfare has happened in and around drones and how things like Australian laser technology, talked about that last night, didn't we, about how that is shooting drones out of the sky. Well, the Sun newspaper in the United Kingdom has been reporting that Iran is trying to show off just how much it's got left. Just how much it's got left. But, as you can see, the Jerusalem Post is quoting American officials who are now saying that Iran's drones, the number of them that are taking to the sky, the number of them that are hitting their targets, well, it is starting to fall. In fact, as you see, the claim is that they're down 86%. Here is the US officials making that claim a bit earlier today.
Iran's theater ballistic missile shots fired are down 86% from the first day of fighting, with a 23% decrease just in the last 24 hours. And their one-way attack drone shots are down 73% from the opening days. We will now begin to expand inland, striking progressively deeper into Iranian territory and creating additional freedom of maneuver for U.S. forces.
Yeah, you're starting to notice in all of this that America is well and truly enjoining the arm wrestle here and are starting to get on top of things at the moment. Again, if Iran is running out of the sorts of things that have caused such havoc over the past few days, and we're at day 6, of course, now, well, that's going to be good. And that also means, as you just hear from the Americans, their capacity to not quite worry about what's coming back from Iran. Again, it ain't over. It ain't over. But the early indications are that what the success has been of trying to resist is starting to fade. By the way, there is a US oil tanker that is apparently on fire as we speak, the claim being that it had been intercepted by an Iranian drone. More, of course, with Pete in the morning or all night long at skynews.com.au. Number 2, ground troops are on their way. Not American, but most likely Kurdish troops. Now, this has sort of come and gone throughout the day about whether they're in there or whether they're about to be in there. The Guardian was suggesting that the US is reportedly ready to provide support, which means guns, to Kurdish fighters to physically go into Iran. Our own website has said that Kurdish fighters are beginning to storm the border and launch a ground incursion into Iran. Thousands of Kurdish fighters have moved into Iranian territory, opening a new front as the conflict in the Middle East intensifies. An official from the coalition of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan, easy title, or just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it, has claimed that the operations began midnight a couple of days ago. The fighters are said to be affiliated with the Kurdistan Free Life Party, known as the PJAK, and are based across the border in Iraq. Of course, Iraq and Iran having previous tensions in the past. Kurdish factions, widely viewed as among the most organised elements of part of the Iranian fragmented opposition. Many of their fighters gained experience fighting IS in both Iraq and in Syria. The New York Times has added to this reporting. Again, there's just this back and forth about whether they're in, but the expectation is that they are about to go in. And, of course, that means they may well already be there, but no one's willing to confirm. So that's why there's a little bit of haze here, but ground troops getting involved. The CIA had previously given small arms to the Iranian Kurdish forces as part of a covert program to destabilise Iran, an effort that began before the current war, according to people familiar with the effort. In a briefing on Wednesday, Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, reports that President Trump had agreed to any plan for the Kurds to launch an insurgency were, quote, completely false. Here is the lady who speaks on behalf of the great man.
He did speak to Kurdish leaders with respect to our base that we have in northern Iraq. But as for any report suggesting that the president has agreed to any such plan is completely false and should not be written.
And good news, again, there will be another flight that's making its way towards Australia. There'll be more Australians that will come home over the weekend. But as we were on the air last night, the good news was coming clear that people have made it out of the Middle East. They have made it home. Here is just a taste of those happy souls to be back in the greatest country of all, the one that we love above all others.
She's back!
It is absolutely good to be home. Especially the actual first flight out of Dubai straight to here was fantastic.
Safe, happy, back to my family.
Relieved. It was the first flight back home, and we took our chance.
I was playing a tennis tournament in Fajr yesterday, and a drone hit probably 10 minutes from where we were playing, and the oil factory was going up in smoke, and we were right next to it, so it was a bit scary.
Geez, that is frightening. As for the latest from the government, this is what they are saying about the next few days before we meet again on Sunday night.
We are deploying additional foreign affairs personnel to the region to help with consular requirements, that is, to help people. We have 24,000 Australians in the UAE alone. So the fastest way to get as many people home as possible is for commercial flights to restart.
Now, again, we will get into all of it with great detail on Sunday night. Remember, we've got the show on Sunday night. We get the jump on the opinion of the week. That's when it really kicks in. Sunday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, but 24/7 at skynews.com.au and all of our excellent news services, morning, noon and night, for the latest information about what is happening on the other side of the world that will affect the rest of the world. But now let's turn to what's happening here. Attention has been there all week. Angus Taylor's first week as the Leader of the Opposition in the Parliament. How have they been behaving? How have they been arming up against each other? I've got to say, I like that Tim Wilson gets under Jim Chalmers' skin. I love that they are being needled by this guy. Again, I'm not a massive fan of the singing, but still, I like the fight that's happening there. But there is an area and there is a person who deserves particular credit, and that is the Shadow Education Minister, Julian Leeser, because today he decided to try to return the conversation to the excellent subject that is the kids not being fantastic at school. And despite our love and despite all of the technology and all of the so-called extra money that's gone in for a long time, there is particularly a problem with boys' education in Australia. Now, I'm very bored of this idea that if you talk about the problem with boys, somehow you're excluding girls. Well, that's rubbish. If there was evidence suggesting there was a problem with girls' education, I'd be making exactly the same point in reverse. But how many years in a row do we have to have the same pieces of data before anyone starts to take real notice? Because, of course, every Australian citizen, regardless of sex, gender, ethnicity, deserves the best possible schooling system that supports and is adaptive to their ability to get the highest levels of education that they would like to be able to inform their choices for the rest of their life. Now, I get it that boys and girls are different. Teenage boys and girls can be very different. But previously, Julian has said that there needs to be an inquiry into the failures in and around boys' education, and I think that's spot on. He also noticed a little detail that many didn't in a report that was released today by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's about schools. It's about how many kids are at a private school, a public school, an independent school. But then we get to this detail. 81% of all students finish year 12. Great, right? Only problem is that is grossly fiddled with by the number of private school kids who finish year 12. Just 75% of all public school students make it to the end of year 12. 25% disappear. Not just because they go off into a trade, but maybe they give up. Maybe they go and do something else that's not about vocational skills. So the average is being skewed by the private schools. What about this? 85% higher than the average of all students, 10 points higher than public school students, are female students that are making it all the way to the end of year 12. Great, awesome, good. Future is female. But you've got a problem when 77% of all male students, given the same opportunities, the same education system, are not following it all the way to the end of year 12. Now, again, I'm not stupid enough to believe that the only possible education and the only worthy education is to make it to year 12 and then definitely go to uni. How long have I talked about the mistakes that have been made over 30 years in this country of trying to embarrass people who want to leave school at year 10 to go and get a trade, to go and get a job. And the people who did that 20 years ago are probably people that aren't working as hard as they used to because they've got people working for them. And if you are still working as hard as you did 20 years ago, I get it, but you get my point too. That plenty of people who've made it into the trades have done far better than the people who went and focused on the arts or the airy-fairy or the arty-farty stuff of university. Here is Julie and Lisa making that point today about this gap between boys and girls and how far they end up going in school with my mate and colleague, Kieran Gilbert.
There's an 8-point difference, Kieran, in the retention rates of boys and girls. We've been seeing this occur for quite some time now. We've done wonders in relation to the performance of our girls, and that should be a cause of celebration. But this isn't a zero-sum game. And it's the reason why I've called on Jason Clare to have an inquiry into boys' education. I think it's probably that boys are responding differently to education, to the education system to girls, but we need to really get under the bonnet and have a look at this.
And something just as concerning, in fact, more concerning, is despite all of the money, despite all of the efforts, despite all of the community support, the number of kids that are Indigenous kids in Australia that are making it all the way to the end, well, those numbers are frightening to see. Remember, 75% of all public school students make it to year 12. Kids in year 7 and 8 making it to year 12 who are Indigenous kids in Australia, it's not even 60%. Those that are making it past year 10, again, less than 60%. The all-student average, which is grossly overrepresented by the female performance and the private school performance, is at 81%. Now, at risk of seeming a little twee, this is all about the next generation. This is all about the next generation of workers and citizens and parents. And for all of the conversation that is constantly and endlessly about the importance of education, the results get worse. NAPLAN, how often does that start to go backwards? And there might be a slight tick up this year on last year, but there is clearly something wrong. It might be everything from school discipline to the wokeness of the classroom. You take your pick. But there is plenty wrong in our schools. We have to have a conversation about it, because if you genuinely care about the future, it's all well and good for people to separate their soft and hard plastics and to have a belief that Australia with 1% of all climate emissions somehow can fix the world because the world is dying. Well, one thing we can 100% fix is the education outcomes of our own country. Take it from me. I wasn't particularly good at school, and I have absolutely lucked it out in life to be here each and every night. But I'm the exception, not the rule. And the rule is a little frightening. And speaking of those deltas between Indigenous Australians and their fellow wider Australians, the wonderful Jacinta Price has had plenty to say on this issue, and she made a fantastic speech as part of her response to the Closing the Gap stuff, which happens each and every year. Now, I think that what she had to say was fascinating, and I thought rather than try to paraphrase it, I should just show you what she said.
While Prime Minister Rudd's national apology to the stolen generations didn't fix things, it was a significant moment in our nation. The sorry in 2008 wasn't only for the stolen generations. The national apology was also a national commitment to not forget the sins of the past and to not repeat them. That intergenerational commitment must always be maintained. However, almost 20 years have passed since the national apology, and I believe it's time for something beyond remembering the apology each year. I believe it's time for forgiveness. The act of forgiving is not to forget the tragic past. Rather, it's a means for our nation to move beyond the tragic past and no longer be its prisoner. Forgiveness is not only essential for the cause of reconciliation, forgiveness also helps to nurture the love of country that's necessary for a strong, prosperous and united nation.
Absolutely. Right? Nobody ever quibbles about, and certainly I don't, about the pages of history. We have to tell the truth, as difficult as that can all be, but the pages of the future are unwritten. I completely agree with the Senator, and we have for years, about the country finding a way to move forward and to move forward together. And if there are problems in certain postcodes, then we need to hit those things with all of the support that exists, regardless of where that postcode and what the kids are. I'd love to know what you think about that, and obviously the full comment from Jacinta Price, who we look forward to talking to again very soon here on Paul Murray Live. But first, well, continuing, I don't know why I keep reintroducing the show this evening. Forgive me, I'm so excited about the Grand Prix. The Prime Minister has had a little bit of trouble. In fact, he's had a big loss. And dare I say, we've had a big win. Now, obviously, no one will dare credit us for talking about it, for highlighting it, for banging on about it, for pointing out how absurd all of this was. But the Prime Minister, while he might be record numbers in the Parliament, the guy who thinks he's going to be there for the next however many years, there is actually every now and then a time when a bad idea gets killed off, regardless of how hard he wants to push for it. As you know, we told you in September of last year that the attempts to make it harder for you to get information via the Freedom of Information system was bad for democracy. This government has, whenever it is pressed for information, is one of the worst of all time. For those who didn't like the Morrison government, these guys are worse than the apparent sins of the Morrison government. That's not me saying it, that's people like Rex Patrick, the former senator, who is saying it. We've had people like David Pocock on the show, and David and I would not agree on much, but we agree on the lack of transparency that exists in and around this government. And they bully the process, and they assume that things like freedom of information laws nobody's really going to pay attention to. Well, we did, we have, and you hammer, 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 because this is one of the very, very, very few ways that you can compel the government to tell you what's going on. Now, too many things get redacted, and they wanted a system where basically anything that went anywhere near the cabinet table would be automatically redacted and you wouldn't be able to get it, and it'd be a lot of money to even try to apply. But thankfully, a lot of people from a lot of different angles, right, from the left, the centre and the right, have all come and said, terrible idea, terrible idea. Well, today, guess what happened? They pulled the legislation. It will not be going forward. Why? Because the opposition and the crossbench, there is no path for this thing to pass with a majority in the Senate. So they can be as in charge downstairs, they just got their backside handed to them upstairs. Well done to every and any senator, regardless of whether I agree with you on everything else or disagree with you on everything else. Thank you for blocking this terrible idea.
It would not pass the Senate in its current form. But this is an important reform, and the government does remain committed to it. Freedom of information is a vital feature of our democracy, but the way the FOI system is working now is unworkable.
You mean the one where you take forever to reply to it, and often if it's really juicy stuff, there's lots of black lines over it? Please, what garbage. And by the way, just about process, because one of the things that I'm obsessed with talking to you about is how the sausage is made, because you care about all the little stuff when it comes to politics. It's why I flood you with all the info and the graphs and the numbers. And I know most people like it most of the time, sometimes maybe not, but still, I just want you to be armed with all that information, so when you talk about this stuff with people who disagree, you can go back to that central information. And that's why process matters here. Because apparently the allegation being made by the Liberal senator from New South Wales, Andrew Bragg, is that the government offered to get their legislation passed to make it even harder to get information out of the government, more staff to the opposition. Vote for this, you get more people who work for you full time. Maybe they can make bad social media videos like the ones I'll show you in a couple of minutes' time, or it's people to help with constituent work. But what a trade-off. Not, we'll back in that road project you like. No, we'll put an extra person in your office. Again, this was him making the statement. Apparently the negotiations were taking place before there was a change of leader. Susan Lee was never going to take up this deal. Angus Taylor apparently wasn't even offered it.
Certainly the government had tried to do a deal with Susan Lee to get our support for the FOI in exchange for the opposition getting more staff. Now, Susan said that that was the wrong thing to do, and she was right, because why would we trade a principled position away from more staff? I mean, we should never do that. So that wasn't a serious attempt, I think, by the government. That's been rejected, and the idea of the FOI reform is to make it harder for people to get access to information. So I don't think anyone in the Liberal Party thought it would be a good idea to support that idea anyway.
Correct, well said. Again, one of the things that I hope we have built as our connection over the years is, sorry, I'm already moving on to the next topic, but still, one of the things that I hope that we've built up over the years is a genuine connection and the patience when I talk about the process. Thankfully, the system stopped the people in charge of the system being able to hide more information about the system from you. I appreciate the loyalty that you've shown me for so long, the patience at times when I take a long time to explain something and then eventually the penny drops for all of us. But it's what we do, and I think it's really important that we do it. Again, to everyone who fought this thing, good on you, and to the senators who blocked it, thank you. Speaking of Susan Lee, though, the Farah by-election, it will now be held on my mum's birthday, May the 9th. Sorry, Mum. Looks like I'll be around Albury and won't be at your joint on the actual day of your birthday. Well, Susan Lee, of course, she resigned from the Parliament. The by-election will now be on the 9th of May. This will be an automatic test. Angus Taylor, can the Libs hold on to the seat? Pauline Hanson, can One Nation take the seat? The National Party, will you come up through the middle, or will the Tiffany Teals find a way? Multiple headlines, multiple versions of the same point. What is interesting to note here is that the only named major candidate when the by-election has been called, and I think this is part of the politics of exactly when the date was announced, is the Tiffany Teal. Michelle Milthorpe is her name. She is an independent. She runs as a country independent, but Climate 200 are out there saying, let's get into the game in Farah, and that's going to be the person they are going to back. Nationals have not told us who their candidate is, nor have the Libs, nor have One Nation. Now, last night on the program, you may remember, I sort of felt this might be a problem, so I quickly asked Sean Bell, when will we get a candidate for Farah, being the candidate representing One Nation, because they're the ones seemingly with the most to win here.
I can say right now we are very close. We'll be finalising a candidate this weekend. So we've actually got 3 candidates. They've been publicly announced. People will be able to find out their names when they look for them, and that'll be this weekend. We'll know who the candidate is.
All right, good. Hopefully by the time we're back on Sunday, there'll be a candidate for everyone in stock. And yes, of course, we'll go and do a pub test in Farah, because that's what we love to do, go and be with normal people all over the place. By the way, interesting story in the Border Mail. That's one of the local newspapers. Labor probably not going to stand here. Now, this is really interesting because Labor preferences went 75 to 25 for the Teal at the last federal election in 2025. So if there is no Labor candidate, where do the Labor votes go? Now, basically, you can see about a quarter of the Labor vote went to the Libs. Does that now move to One Nation? Does it stay with the Libs? Does it go to the Nats? Again, the shooters, which have been there in the past, well, guess where their preferences go? Off to Labor. The Greens, 81%. But, of course, One Nation, their vote is going to go from pretty small percentages to massive percentages. The Liberal Party will go up against the National Party as well, because when a member like Susan Lee leaves the seat, it's open to a 3-cornered contest. So all of this, does this make it easier for the Teal, who incidentally has said that they won't put One Nation last? Does it make it easier for One Nation because if there's more people on the centre-right, they all start to preference each other, or is it harder for both? Again, all the fun that will work out together. Speaking about those extra staff, when it comes to politicians, one of the reasons why in the last Parliament the government handed out extra staff was to help politicians with their social media platforms. Because of the war, we haven't had much of a chance to get to this week, but I wasn't going to let a week go by, especially a sitting week, without showing you some of the crap that they made while you were working, including the senator, who I'm sure loves that she gets a mention in this segment. Do you like the almost second by second that turning up to Parliament, walking through security and getting to her office is 3 separate things? For everyone else, it's just going to work. But, you know, this is how important it is that we have this insight into their lives. What about the Greens leader, Larissa Waters?
You know what I say? F them. Exclamation point. F them. Yeah, F them. That was so fun.
And despite the fact that, of course, the Labor Party was trying to introduce new laws to make it harder to know what they are doing in government, Labor people think it's time to continue spilling the tea about what went wrong for the Libs at the last election. Yeah. Aren't we paying you to do local member work? Oh, no. Party more important, right? Party more important than however long it took to read the report, which she didn't, to make the video, which she definitely did.